Good morning. We're going to go ahead and get started. So give people a few more seconds to find a seat for this really amazing panel that we have starting in innovation. So we have a full day of innovation panels today, which we're super excited about. This first one is Venture Capital for a Future-Ready Century. Our presenter and moderator today is Crystelle Desnoyer. I'm going to have her come up. Can everyone help me to welcome her and also the panel to come on up and get seated? And I'll have you. Good luck.
Thank you so much for having me today. So excited to be hosting this incredible panel covering the entire United States with Miami, LA, and obviously New York City represented. I am on the board of La French Tech. The French have been represented a lot at this Smart City Expo with Etienne, the former CEO of Paris 24, as well as a consul who opened yesterday. So it's a deep privilege and honor to be welcoming our wonderful tech experts and VCs to the stage with me. So there's Julie, Tenzin, and Leigh-Ann with me that's going to be covering a lot of the VC state in the smart cities as well as climate tech, etc. So we're going to be nerding out a lot this morning, which I'm looking forward to. All right, good morning on this beautiful Thursday intimate room. So I'm gonna let you guys introduce yourselves. I've had the pleasure to work with you over a few years and get to know you over the past few days as well. So Tenzin, if you wanna open up and just let this beautiful crowd of wonderful unicorns know what you do, who you work with, and a little bit more about you.
Thank you, Crystelle. Good morning, everyone. I can't see really anyone.
There is a massive spotlight.
I know you all are there. My name is Tenzin Seldon, and I'm the founder and managing partner of Pulse Fund. We are a venture capital fund investing in high-growth climate companies across 4 sectors: mobility, infrastructure, energy, and food and agriculture. For me, as an investor and a venture capitalist, I really look for companies that are not just scalable, but also commercially viable, not just seed projects that are science projects, but really climate companies at this helm that are really able to take their product and make sure that they can have the right market fit and have the right communities that also they can achieve climate stabilization.
So Series A and up founders, please meet her after this panel.
Good morning, everyone. How are you doing? Oh, we can do better than that. Good morning, everybody. Okay, hopefully you got your Starbucks or your coffee. So my name is Leigh-Ann Buchanan. I serve as president and CEO of Miami-Dade Innovation Authority, MDIA for short. And we are an interesting vehicle because we focus on helping municipalities really fast track the procurement and piloting of emerging technologies that can help them more effectively and efficiently solve big challenges and improve quality of life in cities. And so what we do is we run pilot-based open innovation challenges where we identify, invest in, and help support startups from across the globe really validate, to your point, the product market fit in a real commercial setting right now here in Miami-Dade County, but hopefully in other municipalities across the country. And we fundamentally believe that the public sector, even though it's often disconnected from private innovators and the private sector, is an untapped catalyst for commercializing technologies that really address the needs of regular residents in cities. And so I'm excited to talk a little bit more about our unique model.
Hi, I'm Julie Samuels. I'm the president and CEO of an organization called Tech NYC. We kind of sit at the intersection of the tech sector here in New York and what I think of as the civic infrastructure of the city. So the city, the state, but also kind of the various civic organizations, if you will. But we're a member organization, and we really focus on ensuring that tech companies can grow and thrive in New York, but also, just as importantly, that tech companies are helping New York grow and thrive. And it's kind of that push and pull. I live in the middle of that. And so I'm really excited to talk about what we're seeing in New York, what's working, where there's opportunity, where there are challenges, et cetera.
Fantastic. So I'm so excited to host this panel, I must say. So let's get into the meat of it right away. We don't have a lot of time and we're an efficient crew. So what are the areas in smart city related aspects that you are seeing that are really the areas of focus right now in terms of investment? Obviously, you're deploying capital, so I'd be curious to know exactly what are the ones that you're looking into. And also, if you have some favorite deals that happened, that are happening, that you can share, obviously, in the different cities. So again, LA, Miami, New York, that you're seeing that are rising stars.
I'm happy to start. So I really think what's interesting is the technologies that are solving for the issues that are becoming exacerbated by some of the macro conditions and environmental conditions, like, I know this sounds unsexy, but like waste management. In Miami, we recently launched a challenge around how to find technologies that improve solid waste management, because we produce more than 5 million tons of waste and we are about at capacity with our landfill. So looking at ways that we can increase recycling, decrease contamination, and then other technologies that are thinking about how people move. So AI, additions to smart infrastructure. We just launched a challenge in partnership with our Department of Transportation that is looking for technologies that improve the way in which we manage traffic, from predictive insights to kind of analytics that can help around events. You know, we had this conversation about FIFA coming to the United States and some of the disconnects around funding that you would typically see flowing down to different markets. And so with these types of constraints around available resources, around safety and security, I think startups are a great avenue. And the key is, how do we, in advance of large events, really leverage the agility of startups and pair them with cities to really test in real world environments to determine whether or not they're scalable, and to get a bit of a sneak preview about what can be deployed in connection with something so significant like FIFA. So 2 startups that we're really excited about that have been finalists in our challenges is, you know, around the traffic management. We just looked at and invested in a company that is using digital twins to allow for better planning in connection with large events. We have 2.7 million people in Miami-Dade County, but we see 27 million people in visits a year for large events. So looking at how we can better enable the team at our transportation department to plan. And then another interesting technology that we invested in and have been piloting with Port Miami is a technology that uses AI to improve cargo visibility at the port, so reducing dwell time and turn time. And as a landlord port, not like a true operator port, we often don't have visibility into how cargo moves from the cargo operators then to the final mode of transportation.
There's so much to unpack and uncover there, and so little time. And speaking of trash and traffic, so trash for New York, traffic for LA. Maybe let's continue with Julie for New York City.
Yeah, I have so many. I'm going to try and talk fast because I keep thinking of more that I didn't even think of yesterday. But I think in New York, definitely micro-mobility. We're all talking about mobility and moving people around. That just feels so ascendant. One company here that this is what I love about this kind of work in specific cities where there are specific problems. In New York right now, the e-bike situation is something that is top of mind for a lot of people for many different reasons. One of them is battery safety, and we've got a lot of interesting companies popping up around battery safety. Pop Wheels is one where they're building these lockers on private property so that e-bike riders can just sub out batteries. It's almost more like a rental program, so that also the company itself is responsible for ensuring the batteries are safe batteries. So that's just, an example of a very specific problem. But because of the scale of New York, it could be a very big company. So that's one example. Another example, this is a company that's in San Francisco, but is super applicable in many other places. It's called Symbium. It's a company that helps uses AI to help streamline the permitting process with regard to building, as we talk about housing affordability, which is top of mind here and in so many parts of the country, so many big cities with density, figuring out the places. Now listen, I don't think technology is gonna like fix our housing problem. It's you know, there are many, many layers of our housing affordability and supply problem in New York City and across the country. But I do think there are pain points along the way where technical fixes can help streamline. The last one I'll quickly bring up, I know a lot of people, I'm sure you're all thinking about this too, wildfire mitigation, a company I do a lot of work with is called Cornea. It's top of mind because I think it was like 2 or 3 weeks ago, there were wildfires on Long Island. You know, I don't think people in New York usually are thinking that obviously what happened in LA, which is an enormous tragedy, clearly, I don't even have the words, but even, you know, all of a sudden it was here, and the team at Cornea had actually just been out with our state agency in those forests on Long Island, and so as this particular climate problem becomes more widespread, there are so many almost seemingly obvious tech, not tech fixes, but pieces of technology that can help us fight wildfire. Okay. I just blabbed a lot.
So that's a great transition, and sad, obviously, transition with LA's wildfires that happened. And I'm actually curious if there were any like startups and innovation and tech that was used to support that situation.
Yes, I think I'm based in Santa Monica, and my community was affected by the wildfires. So one of our investments at Pulse is around climate disaster risk mitigation. So we recently invested in a company called Floodbase. They do basically parametric insurance mapping, prevention, detection at 90+% capacity of accuracy. And this is really critical for cities, as you all know. My fellow panelists would understand this because climate disaster risk mitigation and preparing, planning, and really being able to have the right measures for a city is critical, and it's not without private partnerships with companies that have the accuracy and using artificial intelligence to be able to gain that accuracy and to work with cities, to work with municipals and citywide and statewide partners to make sure they can deploy their technology. So we're really excited about that investment. In terms of wildfire, we have a portfolio company called Mast Reforestation. It is the only vertically integrated reforestation as a service private company, and they are right now working with cities like Los Angeles, among others, to help them not just account for the burnt wood after wildfire, which is not now just a West Coast problem. It's also an East Coast and global problem. Wildfires are expected to increase 300% in the next 3 years. So let's take that in, 300%. And yet there are only less than a handful of dozens of companies that have a vertically integrated solution for wildfire. And I think that this is a rare opportunity for us to think about climate risk mitigation and what the private sector can do. So I'm really excited about Mast because of their biomass burial process. So they take the burnt wood and they help the local community there, the forest, to be able to regenerate their forest. And then they work with a carbon accounting system, because forests are one of the most practical and long-lived ways to have a carbon accounting credit.
That's incredible. So let's dig in a little bit deeper into how you evaluate the startups that you work with, the impact that they have, and what are the things you look for. Maybe let's go this way. So Tenzin, given that you were given an example, we can start with that.
First and foremost, actually one of our investment associates, Madison Cuthbertson's here. So if anyone, we're looking to deploy right now in software companies in climate. So if you are a founder and have an interesting company, please come talk to us. What we look for first and foremost is a really strong founding team, whether that is an operator, whether that is a CEO who's not just visionary, but has the operational skills and the right executive team to be able to execute, because we believe that there are many ideas, but there's very few people who can implement those ideas. I think that's first. The second for us is commercial viability. We are not an impact fund. We are a climate stabilization at the core, but profitable fund. So for us, we don't believe that you have to trade on profits in order to invest in climate. We believe the opposite, that climate is the largest gross economy transition that we will have, and therefore we have a lot of unit economics that make sense. So for us, we don't just seed science projects. We really believe in scalable companies with real pipeline and real solution that one is solving for. So I think that's second. And third is really about vertical integration. We found time and time again that climate companies that have more than just one offering, so if it's a software company, great, but it can't just be a software company. We look for other angles. Are you a software company that has one or two more commercially viable integration point? If so, then we find that you have an edge in the market. You have an understanding of your product market fit, your customers, and that you're able to actually viably solve that problem. And so those are the three criteria and areas that we found success in.
Just one extra question on the founding team. Do you look at the board at all?
Yes, we do.
So I kind of emphasize on that a little bit because I get questions all the time on founders and like, how do you build your board and things like that. So I did want to emphasize on that. So
just quickly on the board piece, we actually find that this could be the biggest hit or win is if you have the right board of directors early on. So the people who ask the tough questions early on matter the most later on. And we found sometimes founders who give in too early or construct too big of a board or not enough of a board miss the governance oversight that an investor needs to feel secure about their investment.
Thanks for that.
So in addition to the unit economics and market traction and kind of the founding team, we have a focus on the capacity for public sector adoption. So our work is really around these pilot-based open innovation challenges because pilots actually allow for cities to test emerging technologies and de-risk future procurement and future equity-based investment. And so we really focus on, when we're evaluating a company, do they have the capacity to overcome kind of compliance challenges that might exist with integration? Are they able to align across multiple stakeholders? Because to your point about vertical integration around a particular kind of solution, the same thing exists in cities. You're never just working with the technology department. More often than not, it might be technology plus the port, technology plus the airport. We're right now thinking about water and sewer plus technology. So their ability to navigate across multiple stakeholder groups. And we actually look at the team's capacity to deal with bureaucracy, because when you're also selling into larger institutions, are they too green or are they seasoned in navigating some of what seems like obstacles and finding creative solutions around them? And finally, when we're looking at the solution, efficiencies matter. I think we're seeing at the federal level massive cuts happening. Those things are trickling down to municipalities. So to what degree does the solution create efficiencies in terms of cost savings, time savings, optimizing how things operate at a departmental level? So we put about $100,000 in companies that are really designed to defray the cost of the pilot at a municipal level and help them really validate their technologies for other investors, maybe like Pulse Fund, to come in and then support growth more substantially.
I mean, pilots are so key to show that traction, right? And that's what VCs ask for a lot these days. So
Yeah, similar to pilots, but I guess it's technically a pilot, but a little bit different. A lot of the startups that we work with, both at Tech NYC, also a fund called Hanger that I'm associated with as well, is identifying, actually having the government kind of put the company in business. You know, we are looking. So it's more of a studio model in that instance, Hanger is. And I'm a venture partner there, and what we do is we kind of work with the government, usually at the federal level, but it could be at the city or state. We identify a specific RFP. We have deep relationships at the agencies. And it's like, oh, they're looking for solution X or solution Y, and we'll build that, and then we'll be able to kick the tires and see if it works. And so it is a pilot, but it's kind of flipped on its head, if you will. And then, I mean, through the government funding piece, there's some question marks right now about what that looks like. But historically, you know, that's worked quite well. You'll get a SBIR grant and a SBIR 2, and that kind of puts you in business. You're building for your first customer. But then, Tenzin, to your point, we only will take it past that if we think there's commercial viability beyond. But we have a big enough team that we can build that first iteration to see if we think there is commercial viability beyond the first iteration.
And it's really great to have on this panel like all three models in a way. So you have like the VC, you have the catalyst to those pilots with the government, and then you have like the innovation studio in a sense, right? That is already building for something, and then if it's viable, then great. So let's talk about the public-private partnership specifically, because in all three instances, there needs to be traction. What does that traction look like? And what's the implication? Because once you, from what I've seen in the founders I've worked with, once you're in the government, you have contracts for a while. And you need to be able to report that, et cetera. You were talking about that a little bit. So let's talk about the different programs that you guys are all involved with. Maybe we can start with Julie this time.
Yeah, I would say just quickly one thing, and to Leigh-Ann's point too, it's a special skill set to be able to work with and around government. You have to hire the right people who know how to navigate that, who have those relationships, know how to build those relationships. That is true whether you are piloting, whether you have long-term government contracts, whether you're thinking about public-private partnerships. So there are just, and I find in my work, there are just certain people who are interested in government. Maybe they went to law school, maybe they were an intern on Capitol Hill, like whatever the thing is that might not even remotely be related to their business. You find the people who find government interesting, who kind of, you have to have a deep patience for it, because
there is
it
a
can
DNA
drive
for
you
it.
insane, right? So I think that's like an important through line here. That's a more cultural thing than a dollar thing necessarily. One public-private partnership we've been very active on that I would love to quickly call out because I'm just so excited about it is called Empire AI, which is a state level, essentially it's a supercomputer that the state put in $325 million to build. The private funding is coming from a number of universities, Cornell, Columbia, NYU, RPI, the SUNY system and the CUNY system, and then philanthropic dollars, and we're building a building and a computer with top-of-the-line chips that the research institutions will have access to. And it's really, there's nowhere else in the country. France is doing something similar, but nowhere else in America is operating at scale, at this scale. And we think this is a really important public-private partnership because what we think it will do is help attract the top researchers to New York institutions. And we are super curious. I can really speak for myself. I think that's just important for New York. I think it's important for America. And I can't wait to see the types of research that spins out and then the types of startups that inevitably spin out from that research. But we had to use a public-private partnership to build the machine because those types of researchers aren't driven by the same profit motives as traditional private sector. So we kind of feel like, well, if you build it, they will come, and that's a really exciting public-private partnership.
Having access to resources is so key, and obviously, like France is not as gifted with everything, so they have to build, they can't buy. And Mistral is definitely killing it, but it's still unfortunately a small little player in the AI space. But yeah, thanks for mentioning that. I actually didn't know about it.
I'd love to highlight. Oh.
Yeah. No, go on.
Okay, I'll be brief. So MDIA is actually a nonprofit, and we're an interesting animal because we were founded through equal parts investment from public, private, and philanthropic funders to really test this hypothesis: is could we build this public innovation authority vehicle that bridges disconnects between private innovators and the public sector, not in an aspirational way, but something that was like outcomes driven. And so what's been interesting about this model is we operate under a P3 mandate, but we still retain our independence. So we can operate kind of as like an outside VC arm for local government, but also an innovation consultant that is deeply embedded, but not necessarily a for-profit kind of consulting arm, which allows us to do things like actually invest in companies, but then facilitate their pilot, help our partners in government build capacity to be faster and more effective about how they innovate and how they pilot. A couple of examples is we have learned that RFPs don't work for innovation. I don't know why we're still using RFPs as the way to procure innovation, because the reality is, to the point that you were mentioning, there's a big delta between the pace and the investment in R&D that happens in the public sector around the same problems that the private sector around the same problems that the public sector has. But there's often no vehicles that allow to bridge that disconnect, and RFPs require that our government partners know the solution. But if they're not in the private sector, how would they know the solutions? So we really kind of changed the dynamic by helping our department collaborators better define their problem sets and then casting a wider net to the private sector to come with the solutions. And so what's been interesting is we've been able to, in less than 24 months, have more than 350 startups propose solutions to problems in Miami-Dade County. We've invested in 11 startups. We have 11 active pilots happening. When we look at that cohort of applicants, it's $6.5 billion in revenue and $2 billion in funding raised. And that's in less than, it's about 18 months of work. And so what I would offer is public-private partnerships can be effective, but not when they're in name only and not when they do not come with the resources and the model that is designed to deliver real outcomes quickly.
For sure.
I completely echo what both have said. I'd also like to highlight that, with Pulse, because as a venture capital firm, I think a lot of times in Silicon Valley, many isolate themselves and think that they're independent of public partnerships, and that, in my opinion, is actually a deterrence to real progress and commercialization for their portfolio companies. We've approached and taken and adopted a completely new model, which is, Pulse, we just signed a Space Act with NASA. This was a year and a half in conversation and negotiations, and it basically allowed us to look and access $4.2 billion worth of NASA's technology that is sitting in their labs and in the ether, and really take to portfolio companies to see where there can be a match there. This was helpful for both our portfolio companies and also NASA. And this is time and time again, we find that without public dollars, we actually cannot invent and we cannot do the work in the private sector for climate. So, for example, a company that we led the deal for their Series C is a company called 12. They take carbon out of the atmosphere and have a catalyzer that creates jet engine fuel. This company, just like Tesla and SpaceX, required government financing initially to do some of its research. As you both mentioned, R&D development and research is critical. When you are de-risking in an entire sector, you need government financing. Otherwise, private sector is not the first money in to do a project like this. The last time a company like that had done it, or organization, was actually Japan. In the 1960s, had created a catalyzer that can transform to jet engine fuel because the country needed it. So we required public financing, and time again, to de-risk and have catalytic investment, we find that we need the public sector capital and trust and credibility and research.
Can I say one quick thing to that too? I think that we are going to be talking more and more about public-private partnerships, which was the question, in the context of like whatever's going on in DC right now, which is very complicated, but it used to be that there was just more federal funding for research, and I think increasingly we're going to have to unlock the private part of that as well, and who knows where that, as reading the political tea leaves is crazy right now, but I think that it is not going to be the traditional model, and it's going to show private sector interest, I think will be what it takes to unlock public sector funding. And it's just going to shift a little bit.
It does sound like
it. Just really quickly, what I want to add is, I think it's in addition to money, it's going to be data. So what we're seeing right now is efforts to, I would say, decrease the through line between how we access public sector data, or the elimination and erasure of complete data sets. And so there's an opportunity, I think, in the private sector to become kind of that foremost source of data, particularly around climate, particularly around modeling. And so I think it's funding plus data as well as other insights.
Can I ask you a question? Sorry, about that. There's a debate I've been hearing, and I am not really sure where I fall on it, but I would love to hear what you all think too, is should a city or should a local government or any government be trying to monetize their data? Discuss.
Wait, hold on.
That is a great
This is a whole other panel, but I wanted to summarize for a second because first of all, 12 Textiles Company, obviously a little plug there. We talked about the NASA partnerships as well, and we were at a World Economic Roundtable actually with Leigh-Ann yesterday, where a lot of the cities were saying that they have no budget. And they are having less and less, which, to your point, Julie, and so that's where the private sector is really going to have to step up, but also the governments are now really forced to look at the private sector, and they're forced to work with startups because at the end of the day, they're cheaper, they are desperate for, free pilots, etc., and so for that scaling. So there's definitely a partnership that's going to have to be forced into it given the current situation. And just a little fun fact story from the NASA partnership that you were mentioning. The reason you have cameras in your phones is actually NASA. It's NASA's technology that was sold to Nokia. So that's a little fun fact story that I didn't know until I did know. So you'll never unknow this now. And it will be your icebreaker at every single Thanksgiving, Christmas dinner, Shabbat, etc. So I love that conversation, but I think we're going to run out of time. So if you want to answer, you have 1 minute each. Just like an elevator pitch, let's go. Tenzin, go.
Your question was around
Should
governments monetize? I think that governments, yes, can monetize. Whether they should or not is an ethical debate that I'm not going to engage in. But I think they have the capacity and they have the right partners and the right setup to do so.
They have the richest data, right? And as you think about startups and funding startups, and as we talk about this entire thing, like if you have New York City data, and we have great open data laws here, but there's way more.
Without getting too much into the ethical considerations, I think, the reality is governments do have a obligation to maximize, the revenue opportunities that are available to them because of what they do with the funding to then serve communities. So we pay taxes. If you own a house, you're going to pay taxes for real estate. And so I think the question is not should they monetize the data, but how? And what are the limitations? I was having a conversation before this where there's one municipality that charges $1 per foot of access to the conduit that they lay under the streets for fiber. They're going to be laying it anyways. They're going to be, paving roads, so why not create an opportunity to generate some revenue? So I think the question is what aligns with what public sector can do? How are we protecting the data of our constituents in a way that maybe a larger tech company wouldn't? And how are we generating a return for the true owners of the data, which is the public trust or the public? And so I think those are the questions that I would layer onto your inquiry around data.
But I think that we have to be really careful with this question in terms of the ethical implication. I think it's not a backstop because if you look at Asia, China, Singapore, even parts of India have monetized their public data and public good. And what has that led to? Oftentimes that could lead to an overreaching of principles of democracy, which the governance of the people there, even in a democratic institution like India, have had a difficult time because once you do it, it is hard to undo. And so I think that we have to be very, very cautious about that.
And these are really, really important topics that everybody's talking about, whether in Fortune company, even like with the AI, structures, the data management, the AI board councils, etc., as well as in the cities. I was just speaking with the city of Boston yesterday, and they are very much focused on just organizing all of the data and leveraging it for themselves to do their jobs better. So there's a bit of a step-by-step process, right? And it is going to take time. And on top of that, this morning we had a wonderful keynote from NEOM, and so that's where the debate is. They're building a city, they're building the data and the infrastructure for data first, and then the physical aspect. Whereas here, it's like we're plugging in the data post-physical world. So there's a lot of that conversation that's happening in all the different stakeholders of the ecosystem. So thank you so much for this lovely conversation. We could spend hours just chatting about all these wonderful topics. I'm gonna open the floor to questions. I have a spotlight that's in my face, so I will ask for some help.
Do I need to stand up? No.
You don't have to say your age.
I'm not saying my age. Gianluca Galletto. I'm a senior advisor here, but I used to work also for the city and New York, and especially for the housing authority, was running technology partnerships. And one of the things that I had trouble with, I was working mostly on the decarbonization of the portfolio, which is huge, and it's finding innovative companies that had non-software solutions, and also find them in the States. And so my question is, this is more my impression, you can say I'm maybe really wrong, but it still see a lot of bias in money going into software and efficiency. And efficiency cannot go below zero, it's just zero. And it's like, so optimization. So where do you see this, like, and to solve climate problems of whatever type, you need hardware, you need physical things. So I'd like to hear something that can give me some more hope about this.
Yes, I think that that's a really good question. I scoff and laugh when investors in climate only do software solutions, because I actually think it's not viable. If you are a climate fund that is looking for both progress and also profits, you have to have a hardware component. And what we look for is software-enabled hardware. So for example, we invested in a company called Glacier Grid that is using software mechanisms, that it's created proprietary software for basically for the consumption of excess food and cooling and storage unit. And so this has both hardware and software component. So we find that when there's a triangulation, when you have considered and created software, but that there is a hardware component, that these companies are able to not just go further along, but also able to draw the customers in a way that is actually meeting multiple needs. So it actually is overall more progress on the climate stabilization front.
I would just add, and I really appreciate your point, because when we started our Open Innovation Challenges, we actually started with sargassum seaweed, and we were looking for companies that could repurpose the seaweed into something that was sustainable. And we realized that oftentimes when we're dealing with solutions that are not software, that touch the built environment, that there's often more regulatory concerns, and there are interoperability challenges that don't just exist in software. And so what I like to say is focusing on how you design those pilot of those solutions will take longer to scope the pilot, but then you get more insights on the back end, because you're able to sometimes get regulators to bend. We were able to get our Department of Environmental Resource Management to change their mind around even some of the chemical testing requirements that they were originally proposing. And being able to bring all the stakeholders to the table for the test is critical to kind of streamlining the implementation of the solution on the back end.
I just want to say one thing. This almost made me giggle a little bit because I was thinking about just how hard it can be to work with government, particularly local government, and how we fought for years to change how local government thought of CapEx and OpEx to procure cloud. And we were all like, you need to put more in the cloud. And the government was like, well, we can't. We have to buy the hardware, the machines, because it's CapEx and the cloud is OpEx. And we were, it was like, oh my God. And so, government can be slow, but I think we're getting better. Younger people are working in government who understand these challenges, but it just made me think of that fight that I had not thought about for a long time. And I'm not that young. Yes, well, no, you are.
Unfortunately, we are out of time for other questions. I know it's an incredible panel, so please come find them, harass them before they all leave. They will be around the rest of the day, most of them at least. So thank you for listening, and thank you to our wonderful panelists for coming and sharing your thoughts.